episode of Pinball Party. He does a great job. So thanks, Jason. Speaking of Jason, one of the things he broke that kind of blew up the pinball world was during his podcast. I'm on the wrong story here. So he dropped a news bomb. He said his guest received a text during the show that Aimtron, the parent company of American Pinball, was, quote, looking for a buyer for the pinball division. So this blew up and everybody started talking about American Pinball is going out of business, blah, 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 which to Jason's credit and to Kaylee Hernandez's credit, that's not what they said. They said Aimtron is looking for a buyer, which would indicate that they're trying to stay in business. They're just trying to find an investor, right? Maybe that's what that means. Or maybe it looks like they're just trying to get out of it. You never know. But they didn't report that they were going out of business. People just kind of like took that and ran with it to the next level. So and Nick, stop me at any point if you want to jump in on any of this, but in response, American Pinball planned a live stream on Twitch. They launched their own new Twitch channel where they said they had huge news. They were going to drop all this amazing new news. So basically they ended up coming down to two announcements. One, apparently their service tech had left at the end of the year, and one of their big announcements was that they were hiring Lloyd from LTG. Actually, Lloyd the Great, you know him from Pinside. He's been around forever. He runs SS Billiards, former tech of JJP, and I don't know if he's tech for other companies too, but hired him and a guy named Maurice will also be doing tech for AP. The second announcement is that they were doing their own pinball board systems. So they've spent the past year or so developing their own board system. Currently, their games use the multimorphic P3 Rock board system. And for some reason, they decided they didn't want to do that anymore. I guess it makes sense because Aimtron, their parent company, manufactures printed circuit boards. So in some ways, it does make sense. On the other hand, does it make sense to put all this research and development into developing your own board set when you've already got a solution that works? In the long run, maybe it pays off because your cost per unit goes down. You don't have to buy from another developer, another supplier. So I don't know. Those are the big those don't strike me as huge announcements either. So they built up all this excitement to be like, we put a new board set in, and we also hired some service techs. I was like, on Discord, I was like, only in pinball would the hiring of a service technician be considered big news. like, oh, Samsung, my refrigerator manufacturer, oh, they got new service technicians. Great. They're not going to do a whole announcement about it. They're just going to do it and provide a customer a level of support that you come to expect, right?
And people wonder why we only do a once a month podcast, you know?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. These are the big news.
This is the fucking news, folks.
Yeah. So Nick, I'll kind of let you take it from there. I know you got some thoughts on all this.
Yeah, you know, I mean, we've talked a lot more about American Pinball than we have in the past, and I think our response to Galactic Tank Force, you know, was interesting, right? It caught a lot of attention because they certainly wanted a lot of attention with that and made a splash with it, for better or for worse. And I'm always interested in like pinball from like a business perspective. So I saw that rumor, and I was like, yeah, whatever. It's a rumor. I didn't think much of it. You know, I think last year around the time that GTF was announced, I said, look, I could see American Pinball going out of business in 2 years. So I was like, okay, I could see why somebody might buy into that rumor or think about it, just because I think from the outside looking in, some of the things that they're doing doesn't make sense. But then you have to also take into account that, like, from the outside looking in, you don't have all the information, right? Like you can try to make sense of it, and that's what we try to do, right? We try to predict things, make sense, try to acknowledge what we think is working, what's not, and have a discussion around it, because I think that's interesting. And then I saw that Dave Fix was on the Pinball Profile, Jeff Diolis' podcast, and it's kind of like the Streisand effect, where I was like, well, okay, now you're continuing to talking about the rumor, you're going to address it. Let's see what Dave has to say. And I think I got to give this context, Kevin, like, you know, earlier I mentioned that Scott Kuthies was like one of the first people I met in pinball, or maybe the first competitive person I met. Well, Dave Fix was the first person I ever met in this pinball hobby. When I got my Ironman in January 2011, I got referred to Dave because I needed help repairing my pinball machines. I didn't know what I was doing, so I got referred to Dave, and I gave him a call. And within 1 minute of the conversation, I just want my game repaired. He's telling me about his mustache. And you know, I have like a lot of Dave Fix stories that we don't have possibly amount of time for that. But you know, I ended up becoming friends with Dave. And Dave was very nice. He came over and fixed my pinball machine. Dave was very passionate about pinball. He's kind of really interested in the historical and the history of pinball. Didn't charge me for it, which is really cool. And I think I asked him, I was like, hey, I'm really eager to learn more about this. Can I come along with you on repairs or whatever? And is there anything I can do to help? I think months later he called me and went to help pick up a pinball machine somewhere. And then again, I developed a friendship with Dave. Dave started storing pinball machines at the house I was living at the time. And I would work with him to help repair these machines. Usually I'm just holding a flashlight or handing Dave tools. But you know, there was a point in time where Dave was probably coming to my house once or twice a week. You know, we would go on trips to pick up machines together. So long story short, I probably spent like 5 years where I was interacting with Dave Fix a lot. So I know him quite well. So it's interesting to talk about what's going on in American Pinball because I know Dave from that perspective. I really haven't talked to him in 5 years much. I only maybe hopped on the phone one time. So I've kind of lost track and touch with him.
I remember the first time I met you, Dave Fix was there. You had that brand new AC/DC machine. I came to your house. You were kind enough to invite folks over to play it, and Dave Fix was there. I was like, "What am I getting myself into?"
100%. Love Dave. He's a character.
Oh yeah, totally.
You know, Dave would always Dave likes to bust balls. He busts my balls. I bust his. So, again, I haven't talked to him for a long time, but so I mentioned that because when I hear about what's going on in American Pinball and I hear in an interview, I kind of know Dave's personality. And it's also harder to talk about American Pinball because if we're saying negative things about it and Dave's making decisions, then it's like, well, you know, there's that aspect of it. But here we are. So I listened to that interview. I was really interested to try to understand what's going on with them. And I'll kind of break it down and give my thoughts. And then I'm interested to hear what you think about it because you haven't listened to it, right, Kev?
I listened to the Pinball Magazine, Pinball news podcast. So he did when I had a long road trip to go pick up my my Rojo, conveniently enough. So I listened to that, and yeah, it was longer. It was pretty long. So I have some thoughts from that.
Okay, so the point of the interview I think was kind of to address the rumors, you know, and I think Jeff asked some good questions, but I think some things were on the table and sort of begged the question. So we'll kind of go through some of the highlights of that I picked up and took some notes. When you asked about the rumor of American Pinball, Dave said they're not for sale. Quote, doing fine, doing very well. And then Dave speculated on where the rumor might have come from, and he acknowledged that they've been talking to investors. So here's the thing. To me, this begs the question, right? That wasn't asked. Okay, why are you talking to investors? You know, Dave didn't say that. The question wasn't asked. Like, there's two reasons you would talk to investors, right? You told me earlier in the story we talked about P3. Sounds like they're doing well. They're expanding their facility, right? Like, you might be doing well and you can't handle the orders, so you need to generate some capital so you can grow and get to that next level. That's one reason. Or the other reason is you're running out of money and things aren't going well, and you need to talk to investors to save it. So I would imagine if things were going great, you know, potentially he said, no, things are going so good. We're growing. We need to expand. We're actually talking to investors so we can grow our facility. That wasn't said. So, you know, to me, that doesn't, I think maybe they thought that interview was great and well, but it to me, it just sheds more light on the rumor that things aren't exactly well, but you can draw your own conclusion from that. It just, again, that was my first takeaway. You know, Dave says multiple times that he's a collector first. He mentioned that, I think, on the podcast you mentioned, Kevin, and he mentioned on this. He's very adamant, likes to support what's going on in pinball, and that's true. Dave is a 100% collector. I think Dave said somewhere that he has like 150 pinball machines. I don't I know Dave has a lot. Maybe about 10% of those are working that he's got. I kid. It's probably like 25%. I kid again, Dave. This is the kind of jokes that I would bust Dave's balls with. But yeah, he totally is a pinball fan. Totally is a collector. I just, again, from that I take away, it's like that's all fine and well, but I don't know if the decisions being made are from a prudent business standpoint, right? So that's kind of the clout that I look at this. Dave, so here's the question, Kevin, that I don't know, and I would invite anybody in the pinball industry to kind of illuminate this for us. If you want to reach out, you can reach us at talkpinball@gmail.com. This can be totally anonymous. I would verify that you know what you're talking about, but I'm happy to share with viewers because we don't have this information. And I'm not just talking about American Pinball in general. I am curious to know generally how many pinball machines does a company have to sell to be profitable? Now, there's going to be a difference between doing an original license and a licensed game, and even what the license is. Some licenses are more expensive, but I really want to know. Jeff and him talked about like they sold out of Valhalla, and I think the original run of Valhalla was 250. So if they're setting a goal of selling 250 Legends of Valhalla machines, I guess that like, okay, that's a win, right? They can sell 250. They're making money at that point. And that's not a licensed game, so they don't have to sell as many as Stern would have to sell if they get Jaws, right? Stern has to sell a lot more. Stern also has a lot more overhead because they got a lot more employees. So that's something interesting. That's something that this is like, outside looking in, we don't know. We can only speculate. Also, a good deal of the interview was talked about the new boards, which Kevin mentioned. Dave, again, kind of circles back to as a collector, he wants to make these boards compatible. That's important for him, which is true. But was also said in there, and again, reading between the lines, he said, like, they started the venture in May, but it, quote, ate up a lot of bandwidth. So they invested a lot of time on this. And then from my perspective, it's like, did you need to do that when there's other things you could be doing, right? I don't know. This takes time. He mentioned that, there's his team is small many times. There's only a few engineers. Quote, there's a lot more to do on GTF, and they also got to still do work on the new board. So, right, like it's just a question of priorities, which again, you listen to it and it all sounds good, but then you're left to ask yourself questions like, does this make sense?
Yeah, you have to wonder if that's the best use of their time and energy and resources when that's not something that's going to generate revenue right away. In the long run, you may end up saying, generating extra margin on your machines because you're not spending as much on your board sets. But to me, you're better off spent investing in the next game. Is if this ended up, taking staff time and energy away from your next game, is that the right decision to make? I don't know. I'm not running the company, but to me, it doesn't seem like a super smart decision. But again, there are things that I don't know in this situation.
Right. And you can only look and speculate, and that's what we do. And certainly invite people in the chat to give their thoughts. And again, I would love for somebody in the industry somehow to reach out, and I would love to have a kind of a private conversation and share under the cloak of anonymity if I can verify that the person's legit. Just to talk in general about the business and how that works and get their thoughts. Okay, so the really interesting thing to me, and this kind of gives insight to how they think or how Dave's thinking as he's steering the company, is he's the question about original themes. Now, we've talked about original themes through the years for many times, right? Like, I think the industry is in a place where if you're going to do an original theme, you're operating on hard mode. This is my take. You're operating on hard mode. You look at a company like Spooky. Spooky started off with like, an original theme, but they progressed to license, right? They got a base hit and they build up to getting there. Jersey Jack tried an original theme because everybody clamored for original theme and Dialed In. And I think Dialed In is a great game, but the theme is divisive. And people didn't buy Dialed In because the theme was dialed in. I mean, very small percentage of people did that. So that put them behind the eight ball. If that was a themed license, that game would have been a much bigger hit and success. I have no doubt. Stern did an original theme with Black Knight, right? And it's like, yes, it was the third in the series, but it's an original pinball theme that they're building off of, and that didn't do well. So you got to look at that and saying that all these companies, they could do an original theme, are choosing not to. Why are they not doing it? Because it's a huge risk. Even though you hear people say, "Oh, I want here's my meme and my joke." Somebody needs to make this meme for me who's more creative. Somebody inevitably on Facebook or in Pinside will say, "I want more original themes." Right? They're saying that, and then the next thing is you show a picture of an original theme like GTF, and then be like, but not that original theme.
right.
You can substitute GTF for any other thing. That's always how it is. People say they want it, but an original theme is like limitless. You can make an original theme. They've done it like on a cell phone, as people joke about with Dialed In. They've done it on GTF. There might be like this food truck game that's coming out from American Pinball that's rumored to come out. You do original theme on Hacky Sack, right? Like it's just like, how are you going to get it right? This original theme is going to resonate with a lot of people. So, all right, that's the kind of context to thoughts on original theme. Now, in the interview, Dave points out why they're doing original themes, and it comes down to two things. He says, using the IPDB, so the Internet Pinball Database, Dave looked at the top 10 rated solid-state games, and he said, look, out of the top 10 solid-state games, 5 of them are original IPs. Now, first of all, Kevin, these are all 90s games. I know what's wrong with this logic. What do you think is wrong with this logic? I'm going to pause for Kevin's participation here.
Well, yeah, it's I do remember hearing this segment, and I have a point that we'll see if you make it or not. But yeah, these are 90s games. They're built on nostalgia. So like, you remember going to the arcade and playing these games. So there is a built-in audience for these games for the folks who were going to the arcades then, right? So it's not an original theme to somebody who already has a connection with the specific game. They're just remaking these games that are they're proven hits by some of the best designers out there, and they have some of the nostalgia pull for the folks who remember these games already.
Yeah, totally. But I mean, there's two things the first thing that was glaring to me is that you're trying to apply 1990s rules, and I think I'm going to tie my point in with yours, right, to today. Right. You're not looking at what is the market today. Where are we today in the pinball market? And you're not looking at the failures of these other companies trying to do an original theme. I think the most successful original theme in the last 10 years was TNA.
Right. And they sold, 1,000 maybe of those? Like, I remember the first run was like 500.
That's probably a huge hit because they didn't have to pay licensing. So that was like, but that's like one out of a number of them that didn't work out.
Right.
The other thing is like going to Internet Pinball Database. Again, this is something that you went to in maybe the late 2000s or early 2010s. Like,
right.
I was just like, when I first heard that, I didn't hear the IPD. It's like, where is he pulling those numbers from? Like, if you go to Pinside, which is what everybody's using, sponsor the show, and you look at the top 10, it's Godzilla, number 1 license, Jurassic Park, number 2 license, 3 is Medieval Madness, which is, to your point, nostalgia, has that baked in nostalgia. Number 4 is Attack from Mars, baked in nostalgia from the 90s. Then we get to 5, Deadpool. Then we get to Iron Maiden, 6. Then we get to Elvira, 7. Then we get to Foo Fighters, 8, that's crazy. Lord of the Rings, 9. And then Monster Bash, 10. So I think that's a way more. If you're going to try to justify it, that's a way more. That's more of the market is on Pinside, using Pinside and rating things. That's what you got to look at. So how many of those out of 10 are actually original themes? 1, 2, 3. There's 3. And they're all from the 90s.
One of the things Dave did, too, was that he counted Medieval or Attack from... God, what's wrong with me? Monster Bash as an original theme. That's a licensed game. That's
correct.
That's
it is 100%. It's a licensed game.
Universal
so
Monsters licensed game. Yeah, exactly. It's not an original theme.
I went off what he's saying and made the error. So there's only 2. Technically, there's only 2
out
of 10. So right then and there, that's like where it's like, that you got to throw that out the door. So we got the interesting part of that discussion as well was Dave cited like the cost of a license, right? And this is an interesting discussion. I don't know much about this at all. He said like hypothetical costs of like a put in quotes a big IP. He didn't define what that is $1 million. He calls it needs to be paid up front before you even make the game. Dave says they call it internally, or he calls it quote unquote dead money, because they have to pay that before they even start making the game. Then they're giving a time frame to bring it to market. Then there's the royalties you got to pay, per game sold, and then there's like the back and forth of licenses. So, that's why we're seeing, that's the justification for why we're seeing these original themes. Lastly, he brought it back. He keeps on saying that we're a small company. American Pinball is a small company. It's like, well, yeah, but so is Spooky. Spooky's smaller. Spooky was able to do licensed games, and they only do licensed games now. So again, that rationality makes more sense. My takeaway, combined with everything I said, is that I think we've said this before. It's like they just want to do. I think it's like this feeling like, oh, I like original themes. I know some other people that like original themes. I'm going to do original themes for this company. And the question is, how many games do they have to sell an original theme to make it sustainable in the long run? That we don't know, right?
Right.
That's where the question comes into play.
Yeah. So address some of the feedback in chat. It is fronting $1 million is not an easy task, right? Like, but you should be building your company on these original themes to the point where you can afford that. Like, that should be your goal, right? Let's get to that. If that's what it costs, then we'll use that to kind of take our business to the next level. And it's also, building an original theme is not free. The benefit you get with a license is that you get this whole world to work with and all of these assets that you don't have to create. When you do an original theme, you have to create absolutely everything by yourself. The idea, what's going on, the art, the look and feel, the sounds, absolutely everything. So you're kind of trading one thing for the other. In the end, it may end up being cheaper, but you have to spend so much more time building all of these extra assets that go into an original theme that doesn't have this built-in audience of, yes, I take my money, I love this theme.
Kevin is 100% correct, right? I think when I look at American Pinball, their first game is Houdini, which is, I guess, an original theme. It is and it isn't, right? Like Houdini, I don't know if they paid licensing for that or not, given I don't know how that works.
I think it was
right?
public domain, like at this point, but that's a smart thing to do, right? When you're growing, like, here's something people recognize, like, oh, Houdini magic, cool. I kind of get the idea. Let's run with that.
Yeah. So it's like, okay, this is smart. Like, do that. Get something that people know, Houdini. Everybody knows Houdini. Right, but like build off that. Get the base hits, so then you can get the doubles, triples, and then the home run, right? Leading up to a license. Houdini came out when 2015, 14, 16, right? Like,
yeah.
they've not done that the way that I look at Spooky, and like, for all this the Spooky people who get mad at me, I praise Spooky all the time. Like, what Charlie did is fantastic. Like, right, like Charlie got the base hits. Charlie built up to that point where he's getting licenses. So. Again, Dave uses the example of $1 million for a quote-unquote big IP. Don't get a big IP. Or, do smaller ones that are recognizable and work up to that, so that you can get there, you can grow, you can ensure that as soon as you announce the game, like what this new pinball company did, Barrels of Fun, right? Came out of nowhere, somehow had money, okay, never produced a game. They had money to get the license for Labyrinth. And David Bowie's smack on there, okay? Right in the front. So they're able to do it. Barrels of Fun is a small company. Spooky's able to do it. Why can't AP do it? Because they're choosing not to. Or they're stuck in a thought process of that, right? So that's the context. That's the reaction to that. Again, seen some interesting discussion in chat, but Kevin, anything more to add?
Yeah, it's just like, we got a super chat in chat. Thanks, James. He says original themes can work if done right, if done high end. Some themes are in public domain and can be had for nothing, such as Night of the Living Dead. Think Pirates would sell because of the toys, no matter the theme. Yeah. So it's picking ideas that people can connect to, even if it's not a specific license, right?
Dude, Lovecraftian horror, Cthulhu, right? Like there's so many board games on there because it's public domain, but it's recognizable, right? Like you can do things like that. Again, I think American Pinball, when they did Houdini, was a smart move out of the gate. not having to pay license fees. They still have, as Kevin brings up, very importantly, like you still got to create all that content from scratch. You got to have a story kind of concept. They had to have those actors. They had to write lines, dialogue. Not that probably took a lot of brain power, but like there's the costumes, right? That diverts from, if you're a small company, now you're a production company. You got to generate music for, like, there's a lot of work. At least when you license, you have some music you can work with. So it's not a black and white thing. You've got to balance it out. Some things are easier, some things are harder, but there's a benefit to just paying cash for the license and then getting to focus on everything else, just the rules, the production of the game, and getting it out and shipping and then going to the next one.
Right, and not to mention being able to hire the creative people you need to develop these are art pieces. Like, there's so much creativity that goes into a pinball machine on so many different levels in so many different areas of expertise that you would need to hire to pull something off when you're climbing over this roadblock of an original theme to begin with. So I feel like when it's an original theme, you have everything you execute has to be like exponentially better than if it's built on a license that people already love. Like, it has to be like knock everything absolutely out of the park to really kind of get over that. Well, it's an original theme, but oh, this is really good, right? So you have to kind of go back, get the creative people. You're competing with all of these other companies. There's so many people making pinball right now that probably have higher budgets for salaries. You know, Stern and JJP, I'm sure, can afford to pay their designers more than an American Pinball can, right? But just because they have bigger productions and they've built their organizations up to a bigger level at this point. So you're competing with them in the same market for the same level of talent when you're trying to build these products that you're kind of like, all right, like I like Nick's sports analogy. Kudos to Nick for the sports analogy of getting your base hits and your doubles before you get your home runs. I think that stated it well.
Yeah. So I have some numbers to put some, quantitative of what we can, and I pulled these from Pinside. We can try to compare. I'm going to compare American Pinball games versus Spooky games, right? Because we'll put them in the smaller company category, even though American Pinball is a better manufacturer of games in terms of quality and should be able to, they should be able to really crush Spooky. They should be able to. All right. They got a parent company. There's got to be more money there. There's no reason that they can, in my mind. And then also what I didn't bring up is like just the competition out there these days is fierce. 2023, there's a lot of games. Now you've got Barrels of Fun has entered the chat, proverbially speaking. So now you've got to compete against another one. So you gotta you can't fuck around at this point. You just can't, just because you want to do it and doing it, you gotta think about the longevity. So here's the last few games from both companies. So Legends of Valhalla, according to Pinside, and here's the asterisk. This doesn't mean how many games are actually sold by the company, right? These are self-reported. I didn't even look at location. I just put collectors because that's typically much higher than location games. But my thinking here too is that, especially with American Pinball games, most of the people who own it are probably on Pinside versus people who buy Elton John are just they're the casual people. A lot of things are just not going to be reported on that. So I think the accuracy is more in line with original theme games on Pinside than a game like Elton John or Star Wars, where you've got just Johnny Come Lately buying it, right? Okay, so Legends of Valhalla was 128 sold. They're claiming that they actually sold out of their original limited 250 run. It's not. They lied about it being original limited because you can still buy it today. Right. So 128. So that's actually so then almost half the people are in Pinside or self-reporting on Pinside for who bought it.
Right.
And maybe that's even just, maybe those haven't already are in the hands of people that they might have just sold to distributors, and distributors are sitting on Legends of Valhalla. So keep that in mind as well. They can count that as sold. Distributors have to buy the game and then actually sell it. And if these games don't sell, do you think the distributor is going to buy the next unlicensed game from American Pinball? They've got limited space and limited money as well. These things factor into everything. So that's Legends of Valhalla, 128. Okay, maybe that's good. I don't know. GTF though, 35 of the deluxe edition and then 43 of the limited edition. It's been out almost a year now. That cannot be good.
Not good. No.
They had to have lost money on that.
Yeah.
Right. So this goes back to the rumor and why might they be talking to investors? They spent time on this board. I cannot imagine they had a good year. I didn't listen to this podcast. I guess Dave was on one where he was asked to rate the company in 2023. He gave them a C. I don't know why. I've listened to enough pinball podcasts this week alone. I'm good. So okay, so that's that. Now you look at Spooky the last couple games. Scooby Doo, 534 of the collector's edition.
Wow.
Okay, now how does that balance out between the license fees and sold? I've got to imagine they're good.
Right.
I've got to imagine. I'm not even counting. There's 21 Bloodsuckers and 7 standard. Then I look at Halloween. There were 467 CEs, 55 Bloodsuckers, 27. Again, they're this smaller company that Charlie didn't have the backing of another company, has been able to do this on license alone. Okay, they're strapped with resources. And then TNA is self-reported 393, and then the CE is 109. The more interesting thing in here is like look at JJP with Godfather. Now this is concerning because JJP with Godfather is 112 for the LE and 240 for the Cs. So those are not good numbers.
Wow. Yeah, no.
Given they're a larger company than American Pinball, probably not by a ton. But certainly they had to pay for the Godfather license, so they've got to sell a lot more. Now, again, I'm going to come back to my earlier point where they might have sold a lot more Godfathers to just the general public who will never be on Pinside, right? And that might be the only game they have because they love Godfather, they're super rich, whatever.
Right.
The most people, that doesn't apply to people buying Legends of Valhalla. They're pinball nerds who are just super plugged into the industry. That's mostly their customers. Does that make sense, everybody? I hope I did my best to explain the thought process and analysis behind that.
Yeah, it definitely felt like I was telling Nick about listening to the Pinball Magazine interview with Dave, and they just kind of let him go, and the more they let him go, the more kind of sketchy his responses got, and I don't know, it just felt like why are you saying all of this? Get on, say what you got to say, and then move on. I don't know. Just
on the podcast you heard, what was it? The Pinball Magazine,
the Pinball News podcast. Yeah, it was the Langer interview. So okay. I don't know. I don't know if he did himself many favors by going on the podcast, but
what did you hear on that one that was concerning?
Well, there was a lot of the same thing. I think just the thing about his kind of rationale for developing this board set was that he's a collector, and that in 30 years he wants his American Pinball owners to know that they'll be able to replace their board sets now that they're manufacturing their own board sets. Which was kind of like, how is there any more guarantee that AP will be around in 30 years making board sets than Multimorphic? There's no that doesn't make any sense.
Right.
If anything, you would think there's probably in 30 years from now, there will probably likely be more Multimorphic board sets because there's more manufacturers using them. Like Multimorphic uses them, Spooky has used them, American Pinball used them up until now. I think there's one or two other ones. So and the resources will be out there that people will know how to fix these. If past, hobbyists have been any indication, they've been able to keep machines running from Highway and stuff like the original Aliens because people in the community figure it out. So I don't know that was a good rationale for spending a year of your company's time developing a new board set. To one of the comments in chat earlier, made a lot more sense from what I saw from Dave. He said, Aimtron wants a product to put their boards in on a consistent basis. That makes sense. Like your parent company, they want to be able to sell these boards and put them in a product and produce them and make money off of these boards doing what they do. That makes sense. Providing boards to a collector in 30 years, that makes no sense to me. Especially when a traditional pinball company's business, it's their job to sell new pinball machines. It doesn't do them any, aside from the margin they would make on selling a board set. What they do much better selling you a brand new pinball machine than keeping your existing pinball machine running. So that was one of the things that stood out to me. That doesn't really make any sense.
I mean, Dave did point out in the Pinball Pro. I mean, he said that too, but he did point out that Aimtron does manufacture boards, so it does make sense for them to be doing their own boards. I do get that.
Yeah, totally.
Right? That's. Yeah. Yeah, I don't know. I just
Yeah.
I
That's
don't know
about all
how
I
that
got.
helps them in the short term, right?
Right,
Like
right.
if they are, and it just goes back to the rumor that they might be in trouble, and then going back to the interview, there's nothing that was said there that dispels that rumor for me, right?
Right.
It didn't land. He didn't land the jump of dispelling that.
Exactly. I don't know that. Yeah, I don't know that he necessarily solved that PR issue of they may or may not be looking for a buyer when he goes on the show and then he says, "Yeah, we're looking for investors."
Yeah,
I'm like,
exactly.
is that really
And
that
why
much
are you
different?
looking for
Right,
investors?
exactly.
Like if it's all good, you would just say, hey, yeah, here's why.
Right.
Right. Like
so to the point of we were talking about multimorphic earlier. Walk the walk, don't just talk the talk. Show us that you're good. Show us how you're gonna make improvements. I think that's what they were trying to do with the hiring announcement and the board announcement. Like, oh yeah, we're improving, we're good, we're investing all this into the product still, but it's I don't know that he convinced everybody. I think he may have like stemmed the tide a little bit in the short term, but in the long term, I don't think he's squashed those concerns.
Well, at the end of the day, it doesn't matter what the concerns are. It's like you just got to sell games. Is
Right.
your next game going to sell?
Right.
Right? Like, I think that I would have liked if I'm an American Pinball fan, and listen, I want this company to succeed. They're more pinball. I want to see them succeed and grow and mature. Right? So I have more options as a consumer. There's no doubt about that. I would have been well more reassured. It's we really went for it. We wanted to. Everybody else is doing licensed themes, so sometimes in the marketplace to differentiate yourself, you need to try something different, right? And we're able to save money on license, and we really went for it with GTF, and it looks like the marketplace didn't respond like we hoped they would. So therefore, our next game will be a licensed one, and we're going to try to balance. We're going to try to find a balance, right? We want to reach those in the market that want an original theme because no one's really doing it, but we do recognize that the market demand is for licensed themes, and they're the ones that typically make the most money. And I would have been like, okay, great strategy, makes sense. But now I think, what's the rumor? We're going to get Food Truck, another unlicensed game. Like, I mean, I'm here for it.
Food Truck and Cuphead has been another one that's been batted around, which well, that could be one of your smaller licenses, right? I don't know how much crossover there is with indie video game fans and pinball buyers, but at least it's something they can work with. And another rumor that somebody told me on the down low is that apparently Power Rangers might be one that they have, which would be, to me, that's a bigger license. It doesn't kind of hit the nostalgia button for me because Power Rangers, like I feel like I was like too old for that by the time it kind of became a thing, but I can see it being popular with a certain segment of the pinball buying audience for sure.
Yeah, it's something. I agree with that, Kev.
Yeah.
It's something.
So, yeah. So hopefully they can move to that and keep things going, but yeah, developing a board set and hiring a service tech, not exactly huge groundbreaking news. Sorry.
So I will say this. This is not a radical statement. This is almost like a throwaway statement, but it's, if I had fuck you money and a limited money in space, I would buy a GTF for the lulz.
I would support you with that.
But I wouldn't, but just so you know, like, I'm serious. I think there's something there. It's not the itch I really want to scratch, but like, I wouldn't buy a Punny Factory. I wouldn't buy a Thunderbirds. I wouldn't buy whatever that Turner Pinball thing, that monstrosity. So like, yeah, I would, but also like the truth of the matter is I don't have unlimited money. I don't have unlimited space. Neither do you, Kevin. And so you're competing against all these other games that are just eating its lunch, right? So that's the challenge. That's the issue. That's the point of having this conversation. Yeah.
I also don't have a full-time service tech to keep Galactic Tank Force running, so
that's why you need unlimited money.
That's right. Sorry, just hire Matt to just live at my house and keep the game running. All right. I think we've said enough on American Pinball. More to come.